I assume everyone up here has been involved in the EOS community in some capacity at some point, even if it was just being a disappointed token holder. This is, one of those things where I think most of us that have been involved have struggled and been disappointed. And how did we get here? And what was the dream? What was the potential? What was the promise? Clearly, we had extraordinary potential early on, unparalleled by anything else in the space in terms of our performance and our potential. And we clearly did not realize that dream, and the reasons why I think are fairly evident, but they're worth pointing out again. The Block One's job was in running the original token sale and to write the code to allow the community to launch the network, which is very important for a number of legal reasons, and then to support the development and support the network in any way possible. The project was so successful, in the beginning, and that had nothing to do with Block One or any of us. That had to do with the potential as seen by the community, that it became a victim of its own success. Normally, the wheels of justice turn slowly, but if you get too big too fast, you have to start to deal with those issues immediately. And when you're being investigated by regulators, what happens, and the same thing that happens with major financial institutions, is the compliance department effectively becomes in charge. And in a space where being nimble is so important, that does not create the right dynamic. And the community didn't fully step up to take ownership of the network it launched, and relied on Block One and Dan, now with the benefit of hindsight, more than it should have. Dan and I both being, I don't want to use the term victims, but being subject to a contractual arrangement with the organization also tied our hands. I left much earlier on to see how I could be supportive of what we were doing externally, though with some limitations, having continued to be a shareholder. Dan, as he stated, felt he just couldn't do the things that he wanted to do because of, let's call it, compliance. So what's changed? And are we too late? Because the rest of the industry has caught up to some degree. I clearly wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now if I thought it was too late. I wouldn't be re-entering the EOS community, not that I was ever gone, but I didn't feel I was able to do what needed to be done because the circumstances just didn't work. One of the first things that I saw we needed, aside from launching the network and EOS VC, which I didn't end up running over the long haul, was creating the EOS Foundation, which Luke and I worked on, and Galia and a lot of members of the community, with the complete blessing of Dan and Brendan. They said, go do this. I said, this is what's needed. They're like, we fully support, and then the support never came. I think Luke remembers probably a year of what feels like a year wasted. But those things are there now. I'm really excited to see how the ENF has now emerged from within the community. There is no other layer one blockchain that basically has a foundation that was born out of the community and not by those that organized the project in the beginning, which I think in terms of emergent behavior is a incredible example of what can happen and how it should happen, so that we're more of a constellation of organizations that are supporting this development focused on their core competency and what they can do in their lane. I'm very excited about what Dan has been building with Eden. I think if Eden is what could be call it the executive branch of governance. I've gotten very comfortable with delegated proof of stake and block producers as a form of governance. It's been live long enough that other than some of the conversations being had today, block producers have demonstrated that they perform their function, which is to provide the infrastructure, and that they have not been bad actors, and that we have a system of governance there where you need 15 block producers to make authoritative changes and 7 block producers to prevent change, in the same way that we have in law, authoritative and negative controls, or a supermajority to get changes done. I'm comfortable that it works, and what it looks like happens is kind of like what we see in our political system. It shifts from Democrats to Republicans, and every now and then you'll probably see a shake-up of the top block producers, and I think it works. I wasn't certain in the beginning. No one is. You got to see how it performs in the wild. EOS VC clearly didn't deliver in the ways that the industry needed. A lot of developers that came to build on EOS early on were just disappointed that the resources they thought they would receive never showed up. But we now have Pomelo, which is also another amazing project to put resources into the hands of public good to build the bridges, the roads, and the tunnels. One of the things we're announcing right now is a grant to Pomelo to create the investable side, and we're seeding that with $500,000 for the first projects that want to build things that would fall into what I'd call the investment category. And that's what we're trying to do at Helios, not that we're limited to that. We're trying to do what we originally intended to do with EOS VC, which is the investment arm of the ecosystem's development. And so through Pomelo and deals that we can fund as we think about how the network continues to be built and supported, and those that are coming to build projects here will receive the resources necessary if they've demonstrated the merit and that their idea is worthy of investment, which is not always the case. We have the various pieces are here. I'm excited about the prospects of Bullish. Obviously Voice didn't work out. A lot of that was because the SEC didn't approve them having a token. Kind of hard to launch the project when the SEC says you can't. It may not have worked anyway, but these are some of the insights that I have. But Block One, I think, with the skills that it's developed, having been such a giant balance sheet or asset manager, and the token base that they have, is pretty well suited to be able to build an exchange. At the end of the day, what makes exchanges successful is their liquidity. They've got the liquidity to build a successful exchange, and we're going to know pretty quickly whether or not it works. And I remember the exchanges are the distribution, sort of end of our market. If you don't have strong sort of exchange support, that market's never going to function. And a lot of the projects that were built on EOS early on, EOS had listings in most of the major exchanges, but the projects that were being built on this platform were not really being supported. That next layer of how this ecosystem evolves just wasn't there. And Bullish has the potential to be that. We'll see. I don't want to set expectations too high in that area, but it has potential, and as an organization that is, let's say, just heavily regulated, this is the right area of the market for them to function in. They're not going to be effective as a regulated organization in doing a lot of the things that this market needs. It's just you can't do it. When a compliance department has the final say over everything in a space where we try to move at the speed of lightning, it just isn't going to happen. And so them evolving into call it the regulated side of how our broader ecosystem can thrive is, I think, the right place for them. The community clearly understanding that they're in charge, we're in charge of our own destiny, is, I think also what needed to happen. And so I'm very bullish on the prospects of what's happening here. And it's been a painful process for all of us that have invested a lot of time and energy here. But the foundation of what can be built from where we are today, I think is more compelling than anything I see in the industry. And the outcome will ultimately be determined by our execution, and our ability to collaborate.
You see the potential of other EOSIO chains collaborating together and creating this hive of very high functioning blockchains that each one has kind of excelled in its own area, and through working together bring like a really truly competitive proposal for the space.
Yeah, I mean, EOSIO was the mothership, and there had been splintering tribes that split off because they saw what they viewed as the things that were needed to make that infrastructure more effective, and we've seen a lot of success. I mean, what we've seen out of Wax in the NFT market, I'm pretty sure Wax is the largest NFT platform in terms of transactions and activity. We're not seeing the $10 million NFTs being issued there, but long term, the NFT market is not going to be in your multi-million dollar pieces of art. Eventually everything becomes an NFT, and it's going to be in your low value transactions where the market really becomes the potential of what's possible.
At the long tail.
Yeah, at the long tail of it. Right now we're seeing that early phase, and what you read about and what you see in the media and where the speculation is in the high value items. And so that is what we see, but that's probably not long term where the potential is. And the work that's been done at Telos and Ultra, and things that FIO has done, and I'm excited by it, and I think that one of the areas in which we failed as a community is in how we collaborated. This isn't competition, it's co-opetition. We all have different views as to what's needed, and those experiments should all be able to exist.
For sure.
And one of the things I see happening is the band sort of coming back together again, and an interest in figuring out how we can collaborate and work more closely together, and that's evident by some of you here in the room and the conversations that we've been having over the course of the last month. Obviously, a lot of those things that we're trying to do have been somewhat delayed by the negotiations and conversations that I've been having in the background to kind of heal, call it, some of the wounds that exist in the community, which we're going to have to heal from, if we wish to thrive, if we want to move forward. And so I'm super excited about our prospects. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done and still some major hurdles that we have to overcome. The stuff that we're announcing here today, this has been 30 days. And keep in mind, these negotiations haven't just started now. These negotiations have been running for years. People are like, what is he doing right now? It's like, what do you think? This just happened now? I don't even know what version of the negotiation we're in, 3, 4, 5, 10, but it's...
But what was the moment that sparked the, okay, I need to step in, right? I need to go in and do something about this. What sparked that kind of, okay, let's see what we can do here?
Well, in my soul, in my heart, I've always felt something very important was happening here. Something that when we look back from the future, we had a hand in something that made a material change in the world. And despite all my disappointments and concerns, I just kept receiving the same message of, this isn't over. This isn't over. And then I would come back and try to re-engage, and then some obstacle would emerge. And a lot of the greatest things that are intended to happen in the world, you're going to be confronted by lots of obstacles. When you're doing the most important work in the world, you're going to have a lot of things that get in the way. That's sometimes how you know you're on the right track. Some things are meant to come with ease and grace, and sometimes when you're facilitating major change in the world, it feels like everything is trying to prevent you from succeeding. And that's how this whole experience has felt for me. But it keeps coming back again of, no, this isn't over yet. This isn't over yet. And through the watching of what's happened with Eden, you know, watching the ENF emerge, seeing what's happened with Pomelo, the game has changed. The circumstances are different. We are not in the same situation we were in. Obviously, we have a community that is tired, broke, full of resentment, you know, all sorts of things, but it ain't over yet. And
Right.
the message is, it's now or never. And 10 years from now, I'm not going to look back on this and realize I didn't do everything I could do. Like, succeed or fail, I have to know for myself that I stepped up and did everything I could. And I've been doing that this entire time. It's just, it couldn't happen. The time wasn't right. And sometimes that's just how it is. There's a time and a place for everything. It kind of reminds me of a little bit of the story of, you know, the Jews wandering the desert for 40 years before finding the promised land. Maybe this was our test, you know, as a community.
So how do you get to the promised land?
By doing all the things that we're doing. You know, the foundation is set, the table is set. I see all of the potential right now. You know, I'm very good at seeing patterns and recognizing what's possible in the sequencing of events. And my intuition is generally pretty good about this stuff. I mean, there's a reason why I've been there at the moment of creation around so many of the important innovations in our industry. You know, if lightning strikes you once, okay, that might be a fluke, but if it keeps striking the same spot, person, or whatever, repeatedly, there's probably something there. And part of it is I have that pattern recognition, and my intuition is running in full vibration. Now, it doesn't mean that we're still facing a number of challenges here, but you know, I made the decision to take that leap of faith at great personal expense to reputation, social capital, financial capital, time, at a time where, let's just say, it's not like I got a lot of free time.
I can attest to that.
But as I said, it's one of those things you have to do it. And there's also a social contract. You know, I think played a substantial role in this organization's creation and its early success. You know, the community made a big bet on the things that we're doing, and I shoulder part of that. Now, there were a lot of things that were outside of my control, but that doesn't mean that a social contract doesn't exist, and I can ignore it. I don't have any obligation. There's nothing that obligates me to do this, but I don't do things out of obligation per se. I do things because I believe it's the right thing to do. And as I said, 10 years from now, I'm not going to look back and wonder, could this have actually worked? Is the potential of what I've seen here, like, you know, would it have been realized? And I believe there's a possibility that my participation may be one of those things that ends up having a material impact on what the outcome is.
I think it's already having a very, very large impact, and the community is really, really, really hopeful. And you've brought a lot of light and hope into the, from what I'm speaking to the community. I don't speak for them, but for sure, it's been a truly inspiring move. And how do you see Helios becoming like a major impactful positive player in this ecosystem, right? So we got now Eden and the ENF and Block One with Bullish and now
and Pomelo with grants.
Right? And Pomelo,
well, the investment arm. What was the first thing that I supported at Block One us doing, aside from getting the network live, was making sure that there's resources there. I've been a successful VC. I've started many things, and I've raised a lot of capital for a lot of projects. Capital formation matters. Resources are the lifeblood, and EOS VC was something that I saw we needed to support this community's development. And for some of the reasons that I've just discussed and some that I haven't, it didn't end up delivering the things that we needed. And we all have our skills, our talents, our gifts. And so this is an area where one of the things I knew we needed still has to exist. And so that's an area where, what are the missing pieces of the puzzle? What's missing from that constellation of centers of gravity needed for this to be successful long term? The ENF has to only invest in public good, and it also can't participate in governance. The ENF, which is kind of like the Treasury Department, is elected by the block producers. It's kind of like the Treasury Department of EOS, and it can support things like EOS.io development and a lot of the things related to public good. If tokens coming from the network were to go into the ENF and it were to do investment-related activities, that could turn us into a collective investment scheme, and then the whole thing becomes a security. The ENF can't play this part. It can't step into this role if you understand the rules of the game. Most don't, which is why so few appreciate one of the reasons why I think EOS is so well situated. When we look back years from now, the fact that Block One and EOS was able to survive the regulatory scrutiny that it had to endure actually is probably one of the most interesting things that separates this layer one chain from all the others. Because of its success, it happened early. Usually those investigations come at the very end of the process. And it's probably safe to assume that many other layer one chains, regulators are not going to have time to investigate everyone. They go after the biggest players. But the biggest players are going to probably have to go through a similar process at some point. And depending upon the decisions they made, the outcome might be different. We're seeing that if you follow what's been happening with Ripple. We saw a little of that early on with Ethereum, and we haven't seen that with everyone else. We saw that with some of the, call it, smaller ICO projects, and a lot of them ended up having to pay fines and basically shut down. That's what happened to most of the, call it the 2017 ICOs. A lot of those projects paid fine, and those organizations have been shuttered. Now, most of us don't pay attention to that. I was an investor in many of those projects, so I had a front row seat to a lot of this. Remember, I've been involved in well over 100 projects in the space, so I have a unique view into what happens behind the scenes. And keep in mind, when you're undergoing this process, there is no transparency. You cannot blog about what's going on. It doesn't matter what your principles are. It's not a choice. It's not an option. You cannot do that. And so most people haven't had a seat, behind the curtain into what happens here. And so that's another thing that is a major differentiator that I don't think anyone acknowledges for the real value that it is. And that might be the greatest thing, other than writing the original code that Block One could have ever done for us, is they were meticulous in dotting their I's and crossing their T's to a point that it limited the success of the other things they did. But you don't really know until you have the benefit of hindsight whether or not something was good or bad. I remember, like, interesting story, the CFO of eToys. I remember I was an Internet 1.0 tech entrepreneur. I'm like probably the youngest, oldest guy in Internet tech. Because I started so young, at a time where 16, 17-year-olds didn't raise $100 million. That didn't really happen until the last decade. That did not exist in the 90s. You had to be part of the club. And so eToys was one of the kind of famous dot-com crash and burns. But the CMO got demoted because the company was growing and he was going to be made the vice president of marketing or whatever, some title that was not the chief. And so, he's having this feeling of betrayal. Can't believe that his co-founder, his partner, would bring somebody in above him. It was the worst day of his life. He thought his life was over and he was betrayed, and so he leaves the company, he quits, he rage quits. He sells all of his stock. And he was the only one of the founders that made any money in the end. So what was the worst day of his life was actually the best thing that could have ever happened to him. This is the strange thing, is you don't actually know until you have the benefit of hindsight. What you think is a great event for you today may not actually be that great event. And that thing that's so horrible right now may actually be the best thing that could have happened, because we just don't know until we have that time to fully understand all that's happened. And so we don't know yet whether...
We know how the benefit of hindsight, right, with EOSDC. And now how do we make sure that now with Helios, we don't become just another EOSDC having much less capital to work with, right? How do we manage, how do we fulfill that kind of investment promise that we have?
It's not much less capital. We hold our resources in EOS, which is also different than EOS VC.
Right.
EOS VC's resources were not held in EOS. And so the resources we have will ultimately be determined by the success we have. We could easily have substantially more resources.
Right.
And if we utilize those resources successfully, we get even more resources. We're building an engine that is, sustainable and grows if we're successful. Mm-hmm. And if we're not, it didn't matter anyway. That just means we lost a lot more time and I lost a lot of money. But I do put my money where my mouth is. And so we don't necessarily have less resources. And we're not just, going to be the investment arm. We're obviously going to contribute everywhere we can. One of the other things that we announced tonight, and you'll see, is we're uniquely qualified to build interesting products that others probably can't or wouldn't. So we've announced that we're going to be launching an ETF for Europe, otherwise known as an ETP. And so in the public markets of Europe, there is going to be an EOS ETP, which is the equivalent of an ETF. And we're not going to be stopping there. We're going to continue to try and build institutional financial products that allow us to plug into the broader market, to drive accessibility, into EOS. There's not many projects in this space that have done that or know how to. This is not challenging stuff for me. I've been involved in a lot of stuff. And it's just kind of like an obvious thing that's starting to work. And this only just started to work. We saw some stuff in Canada for a little while. The US is just sort of opening up, but the public markets and access to the largest pools of capital in the world really have just opened up this year. And so let's run on the back of that and open up those same channels. There's tremendous value to be created in driving accessibility into the things that we're doing. Obviously, how do we build out a large ability to assess projects and put capital into the hands of the best projects possible? You know, what we're doing with Pomelo, I think, is another example of that. You know, the crowdfunding sort of component for these small sort of donations to get a project a little bit of resource so they can demonstrate whether or not that they're worthy of more. But that becomes an effective way, like we're seeing with Pomelo and the projects that have gone into that first class, a way for the community to be a part of that process. But from there, in the same way that we have angel investing, and then you got your Series A and your venture investing, you have to have that bridge to somewhere. You know, your angel investment is just enough to demonstrate that this team is qualified and deserves a chance. But where does that next round of resources come from? It doesn't exist. And I hope that Helios isn't the only project doing this. Hopefully, we're successful enough that other groups of investors come together to support the development of what is happening here. That other funds in the space start to support the development and projects that are building here. And we could conceivably even end up being, and what I hoped we were going to do at EOS VC was not to put big blocks of capital into a few people's hands. The idea was to identify other potential fund managers and give them some resources, but to get those resources, they had to raise other resources. How do you turn $1 into 5? You know, and the teams that can go out and find other matching capital are probably the teams that were more likely to be successful. You know, you don't want to be the only one drinking the Kool-Aid, as they say. You know, I've learned this the hard way. I find if I'm funding a project once, twice, 3 times, and I'm doing it by myself, bad sign. Usually doesn't work out. If you can't convince anyone else to do what you're doing, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, but that rule generally applies. You know, if you can't convince anyone else. And so there's a lot of things we're working on setting up, kind of co-working facilities, you know, incubator type spaces. This is the stuff I was hoping we would have done at EOS VC, is having, you know, something in London, in Hong Kong, in Israel. And these are just cool spaces where people can come in and do their meetups, you know, have a bit of a co-working facility, interact with other people building, you know, where the analog meets digital. You know, how are you bringing in new developers? How are you bringing people in from, you know, the Web 2 space, right? How do you bring them into Web 3? A lot of these people are still a little old-fashioned and they want to, you know, have human interaction. You know, COVID maybe reduced that a little bit, but you know, having these watering holes, these places where people can come together, meet, learn about what each other is doing, and often that's where teams are formed. Sometimes it's all done online, and that's what a lot of us do. But that's today. But that's in our sector. Most of the tech industry still does work around, you know, community gathering, and I think there's still value in that. We may find out there isn't, but you know, this is how you learn. You try, you experiment. Not everything we do is going to work, and the things that we're talking about now is not everything we're going to do. Now, this is the beginning of a process. You get up every day, you do what you can, you look back and realize what you could have done better, and then you get up and do it again. And it's a journey. And it's one where, you know, we hope to collaborate with, you know, all of the other major players in the ecosystem to coordinate. I talk to Yves every day, sometimes 5 or 10 times a day right now, but that'll probably continue to be the case. You know, because
what about players on the other outside of our EOS bubble? Because I have a project, right, building on EOS, and from my experience, right, approaching VCs in the crypto space, it's like it's tough, right? You generally get this building on EOS, and I did not watch them like face to face, but the general response is like, listen, we don't think EOS ecosystem is now. It's in a healthy place to invest in. So how do we turn that around? We want to get other partners.
How does it turn around? with success.
Right.
And it doesn't take that much. You just got to put a point on the board.
Yeah.
And once you put a point on the board and a second point and you get momentum, you know, that's when people start paying attention again. And a lot of, call it the broader industry, you know, there's not a lot of these things are marked up pretty high. And money in this market moves pretty fast when it sees momentum. It doesn't take that much to get, you know, this moving, but we got to get a few points on the board. And between the work that the various groups are doing, I'm pretty confident we will if we don't mess it up right now. And then from there, the work is never done. You know, this is a long game. You got to keep scoring, and there's a lot of things that need to be done to make this network work better. I mean, there's a list of things, and we'll be supporting in that area as well. I don't think that we're going to be in a leadership role in driving, you know, EOS.io development, but we're going to play a supporting role because we all should be supporting, and we'll probably, you know, put developers on our payroll to contribute, to help in the same way that we have with Bitcoin for years. And, you know, everybody, if you have the resources, you know, put a developer or 2 or 3 on your payroll, and that's another one of your contributions to the ecosystem. And, you know, it pays for itself in other ways, right? It's hard to quantify the value that comes from it, but there's value in it.
For sure.
Obviously, I do a lot of events, and, you know, around the world, and so
You do simultaneous events.
sometimes 2, 3, 4, or 5 in a day, like today, around the world. And so we'll do that because it's fun. You know, I'm a community person. I like to bring community together, and so we'll probably do that. And I wouldn't call that goes into the investment arm. It's just another one of the many things that has to happen for this ecosystem to thrive. And so we'll do that until somebody else is doing it better, and then we'll support them with that.
Do you think it's important
Or
for Helios?
we'll keep doing that.
Do you think it's important for Helios to also get involved in governance of EOS, like become a player and have a say in what's going on, the decisions that are being taken? And I was talking because I've been, you know, building this EOS.io kind of alliance group with the rest of the blockchains, and do you think it's important that we bring a bit of maybe a balance to the table, or get some representation for all their you know, interests that wants to ensure that we have a healthy ecosystem? Like, for example,
Yeah, the answer is yes.
yeah, okay,
Unless you're a short-term speculator, you need to be involved in governance,
yes,
not just of this. In our elections, you know, governance matters. And if you care and you are in for the long haul, whatever that is, yes, your participation matters. Clearly, we have a vested interest in what happens here over the long term, and so it's important that we have a voice.
well, that's already a big difference between what EOS VC was heading to do and what Helios is doing, because Helios is going to be an active player, taking, you know, participating in the conversations, impacting the decisions that are being made, you know, and providing a voice from another angle, right? Mainly from your point of view, but also people who are aligned with your view. And I think it's super important, right? Because that is not, we're not just now an investment arm. We are an important player in the ecosystem. We're trying to bring a voice to what we believe it's going to be the best for the entire ecosystem, right?
Yeah, and you have to show up. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, if you got a big vested interest, you better show up.
Right.
So if you don't show up, you're not going to have a say in these things. And I think we have opinions that matter. That doesn't mean that we're always right, but you want to put all the ideas on the table, because it's not about who's right, it's about what's right. And we get to that answer through a dialogue. And clearly we're going to, I'm one of the first 21 members of Eden, obviously was involved in that process, and I'll continue to support the things that are happening there. I've had a proxy for a very long time, and so we've been involved in the block producer voting, and we have a fairly large stake. And so we'll obviously have to continue to play an active role in that process. And we will always continue to look at any and all ways in which we can add value. I mean, one of the big things, which I was gonna do this last month, but I haven't because we haven't, things have not been fully settled yet. I've got a pretty big platform to get the message out of what we're doing, and to get that message seen by millions or tens of millions of people. I'm just waiting a couple more days or a few more weeks. I mean, I would have been off to the races already.
Yeah.
I'm chopping at the bit to go.
Some people just want to burn the car,
It's okay. This is part of the process. But we're here to do the work, and I'm very optimistic and enthusiastic about our prospects. And I can tell you a lot of very important players in the ecosystem, are calling, and they're like, "Brock, what are you doing? What do you see that we don't see?" And I start breaking this stuff down, and they're like, "Okay, well, people are paying attention." Unfortunately, there's a few more hurdles that we have to overcome, but people watch my moves. And big players that can affect outcomes in big ways. And I'm gonna do my best to move those things along. But I think we all understand we have one little challenge or very large challenge right now that we have to kind of overcome before people are comfortable betting on our future.
Yeah.
But I think I think we're going to get there. I mean, the most important thing that needed to happen is what already happened. Block 1 has decided that the remaining EOS tokens are better off in the hands of the community. All right, that's big. I posted tonight the other part of the conversation is that the community is probably best leading EOS.io development, certainly with all the resources that now come in through the ENF, and owning the intellectual property and all of those things. That proposal is moving along, and there appears to be pretty clear consensus amongst all the players that this is the best outcome. Everybody, there's no disagreements. There's just a process to getting these things executed.
Right.
It doesn't happen in a day. There's lawyers and boards and this and that. I think that the contentious part of how we collectively move forward is over. This is the period, and this part will only happen if it's done in the spirit of collaboration. Right. There is no tool to try and force someone to do that. The only way that this piece happens is if it's done in a spirit of collaboration. It's the only way. And I think everybody's intentions and interests are aligned, despite the fact that not everyone sees it or agrees. But if you stop and look, that's clearly the case from my perspective. And I see more than, not in all ways, but in some ways than others do. Often they're trying to solve for disputes. I do this in many aspects of life. People call me when there's a problem. that needs fixing.
Or when there's an opportunity.
That too.
Uh-huh.
I often refer to myself as a janitor when asked, social perspectives. That or I say I'm a plumber. I clean up messes, make things flow. Carpenter sometimes I build.
Well, Captain America.
Or a hand model if I want to just disengage.
So, well, listen, Brock, I am just one member of the community, right? And I don't claim to speak for the community, but what you've built, the idea of Helios that you put into the universe, and now we're all, coming together, and the ones that are aligned with that vision, trying to make that happen. I think you're a super inspiring personality. We're lucky to have you in the community, where I think I, for one, will always appreciate you doing this move and saying, it's not over. Let's build this. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing.
And go Helios. Go EOS.
I'm excited,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty confident that we're going to work through these issues kind of the past.
Yeah.
And some people probably it'll take a long time for some to
Well, there are
to
some that
recover.
never will, right? But I was talking to Michael and said, the only way is like looking forward, right? If we're stuck in what happened, and it doesn't move us towards a solution.
Actually, at BioA, we have a quote from Churchill on the wall: "If you're going through hell, keep going," which have kept us going many times.
Right. No, and we've built amazing stuff, right? It's not like we're going through hell. We're going through a tough time, and all is the bottom line is translated through the EOS Price that reflects kind of the sentiment and things that are happening, right? But that is only an outcome of the results that we're bringing and the things that we're building, right?
Yeah, price is the primary barometer of sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't track fundamentals.
Exactly.
It generally tracks hype. And I mean, there's some other attributes of what's happening within EOS that people tend not to focus on. But if I were writing, a research report, other points that I would raise is how broadly distributed the token is. That actually matters a lot. Any system where you have an overconcentration of tokens in a few participants' hands is really undermining long term. Now, the negative of that is that you have all your tokens trading, basically, which makes it a lot harder for that market to move. When a massive number of tokens are locked up, you have a thinner float. And a thin float can allow the price of something to be much higher than it probably actually is. As you can see with small cap public stocks and all of these sorts of things, we know how those rackets run. So the foundation of what we had is built to last, though it requires more work to see it really perform. But when it does, it's much more sustainable, and it's designed to last for the long haul. You can take a look at a lot of the layer 1 blockchains that call it the venture support. The financial engineers at the venture capital firms, engineered things to enrich themselves massively, but in a way that is probably not long-term sustainable. And we've seen this, and you can actually double click on a lot of projects and you'll find that these issues are there. And we don't have it. These are things that people tend not to focus on, but it matters.
Do you think we might have gone too far? Because we were getting attacked from birth, right? From Genesis. It's now EOS is centralized, EOS is centralized, EOS is centralized. And do you think we tried to make it so decentralized that we were lacking this kind of centralized leadership like the ENF or now Helios, or right, to step in as a centralized party that every other platform kind of has since birth, and we kind of did not come together towards that because of that effort of trying to show how decentralized the EOS network is?
I'm not sure it had anything to do with that. I think we were disorganized.
Right.
And I think that we were overly relying on Block 1 and
Yes.
Dan versus taking more initiative and being in control of our own destiny. The arguments about EOS being, and its decentralization, it was an argument about delegated proof of stake.
Yeah.
And not having enough examples of it working over the long haul. I'm
Most
not.
blockchains out there are some variation of delegated proof of stake.
Correct.
You can call it nominated proof of stake, but none of them are creating Dan, and it's a variation.
No, we also were so successful that everybody takes their shots at you.
Right.
These are it's part of being so successful early on. Everyone is out to attack you.
Yeah.
Those are good problems to have generally. You ignore it and move on, and we have. Even like Luke will talk about reputational issues in the industry. I don't think those issues really matter. People talk their book. People, have made their bets, and we're not here to convince them. It's the other 99 or 98% of the population of the world that matters right now. We're not. We don't need to try and siphon off people from this network or that network. That's not where the growth lies.
It's not a zero-sum game.
Yeah, the growth is in the massive potential of the future market that is, waking up to this stuff. But obviously there's a bunch of things like that, just basic blocking and tackling that needs to get done. And I think that organizationally, we've got the various stars in this constellation that is EOS, those centers of gravity that will hopefully just start knocking those things down one by one.
Yep.
The stars are aligned.
Yes.
The stars are aligned for this to work.
Do you see?
Now we just have to do the work and get it done, and it's not all about it getting done in one fell swoop. It's just getting that momentum going and that excitement again. It's hope is not there in the way that it needs to be, right? A lot of people, it's just been a long, hard road. People are tired, and that you have to bring that spark back and get people excited again that putting their time and energy and resources here is a wise use of those things. I've made my bet. Now we'll see, if others follow. And once we start to put points on the board and we have demonstrations of momentum and progress and success, that will inspire and excite others. We still have, I would argue, the most interesting project in the space in terms of its potential. It just others don't see it right now. And so we gotta show it by lighting it up.
Yes.
It might also be an advantage, because if the EOS price goes really high, it becomes difficult to develop blockchain contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, if you build a lot of small successful projects, while we stay off the radar, we can actually build more successful projects before it kicks off.
And that might, and again, we don't know until we have the benefit of hindsight. Other markets may crash. We're probably not going much lower.
I hope not.
Unless we continue to fail to execute, but I don't see that happening. I think, again, the stars are aligned, the right pieces are in place together we rise.
Yes. Do you see Eden getting more adoption and eventually, running this model of fractal democracy on actual parts of the society, or
I do.
Yeah?
I do. I mean, I think it's too early to say definitively,
Right.
but I think the prospect is there.
Yeah, the last election put great people as chief delegates, right? It came out the power of randomness was demonstrated, right? So
We won't know for probably years,
right.
but it's another one of those great experiments in governance, and I'm just fascinated by its potential. But again, you don't know.
And you
You
think
have the experiment has to run for a while to validate.
Do they?
We have to validate that it works.
But you think
right now it looks, the randomness and all of these things look like we may have built an election system, that may not be subject to, capture.
party alliances and stuff. But
So we'll see.
Do you think EOS.io and EOS benefit from Eden getting bigger, acquiring more adoption, getting used and more potentially
Oh, I mean-
implemented in our
Well, absolutely.
systems?
There are so many people, in these ecosystems, in this ecosystem, that don't have projects that are, going to be funded for public good, or projects that are, Helios fundable. But there are people that are doing great work for the community that could easily end up with resources through an Eden election process. And the question is, how do we get resources into the hands of the various constituencies or constituents? And there's many people that do community support, community development, that don't really fall into either of those buckets. And this is a way where you're basically, that's why I call it like the executive branch. You're like, I'm running to be the EOS Mayor of Berlin, and give me some resources to basically host all the gatherings and do all the things to get this. It's basically, you're the mayor of Berlin, you're the mayor of New York, and these community managers that become the local this or that. And this is a great way, and these are not people that need a tremendous amount of resource, but the question is, how do we identify them? And this seems like a really effective mechanism by which those that are the best leaders or people that are serving the community around the world can access resources. Because a lot of them don't have it.
Yeah.
But they're willing to do the work, they're willing to show up and serve the community. And this is a really effective way, I think, of electing our, call it, executive branch of this ecosystem. The ENF is like the Treasury Department. We're the financial sort of institution or investment arm. I see Eden, if it works, which it shows great early promise, could be the equivalent of the executive branch. And so that's what I'm excited about. Again, it's very early.
Yes.
But I do encourage everyone, if you're not involved in Eden already, to sign up and check out what's going on there. A number of us in the room here are Eden members that can get you invites and be your witnesses and all that sort of stuff. And so happy to onboard you if you're not yet playing around with what's going on there. And if you haven't read the book, you can go buy Dan's More Equal Animals.
It's also for free, like the digital version. So.
Or the digital version's free. You can go read it. I wish Dan let me help him edit it and find him a proper publisher.
Well, that's gonna do Dan, you know him.
Well, but I could have gotten him a lot of distribution and polish. This is not
For sure.
This is not a new idea of writing and publishing a book. There's a model to how to do that, and I think the more people that get involved in these types of conversations, I think the better off we'll be as a society.
Well, this is working on re-edits, the.
Well, I'm gonna follow up with Dan and help him that.
Yeah. bring the more equal animals to the masses.
That would be the idea, and because I mean, I think that these are really important conversations, you know, regarding our collective future, not just as this project and the work that we're doing here, but, you know, the generations that follow. You know, we're starting to understand who we are and why we're here. And we're starting to understand how things work. For a very long time, civilization and humanity didn't understand the basics of the world in which we live. You know, we're starting to understand what money is. That's really only happened in the last 10 years. Very few people understood the actual nature of money. You know, thank you, Ron Paul, and a handful of individuals that, you know, shine some light on how these systems work so that we could better understand, so that we could get involved in making a difference. And, you know, we're not really here to judge the past. You know, we mean the same thing, sugar. We understand what corn syrup does and how harmful it is to our health. You know, but, you know, Coca-Cola didn't really understand that as they were building out that business. We're becoming more aware.
Or they did and just decided to make the money anyway.
I like to assume that with what generally, because I've done a lot of double clicking on these things, generally it's not bad intention in the way that we often think it might be. You know, a lot of it comes with people trying to solve for a problem, and when they design those systems, they build a little something in for themselves. You know, they're building something in to take care of themselves, right? And it's not normally with a bad intention. They're just like, what am I getting out of this?
Like a vesting schedule.
Well, yeah, exactly. And in the beginning, sure. Though that was never intended to be, you know, for their benefit anyway. So I mean, I'm not sure I agree with that particular example, but yes, sure, it's still a relevant one. But in the beginning, what you do, you don't fully understand where it's going. You know, it's like you fire a bullet, you know, and you're off in the beginning by a hair, but over the course of years and miles of distance, you're off by a long ways. And in our society, we tend not to reevaluate whether a system is working and course correct. We just kind of seem to stay on that road for decades until eventually we have failing systems. And so I'm not sure that's bad intent. I think it's, you know, we're not stopping to reevaluate where we are and think, you know, how do we upgrade these systems? How do we make things better? A lot of these problems we have just seem to be legacy issues that exist from what were probably not even bad decisions at the time, but naive decisions. Not understanding the consequences of those decisions. And then time running its course. Which is why we're back again to take a look at all of these systems in the world and say, can they be improved upon? Because we know a lot more now than we did then. And most things that we look at in the world, there's tremendous room for improvement. You know, whether it be our energy grids, our financial system, I mean, everything. We have new tools.
Energy consumption in proof of work in Bitcoin.
I think that, you know, in terms of proof of work and the argument around energy, I don't agree with the energy consumption problem. I actually think the more energy we consume, the better off we'll be. It's counterintuitive, but we used to power our lanterns with whale blubber, right? It was through civilization's advancement that we needed to find more abundant sources of energy. Compute, in all its form, not just proof of work, but compute consumes a lot of energy. And that consumption and that industry is the thing that's going to finance the upgrading the system. If we started just consuming energy and it became flat, no one is going to finance building new systems. It's only because of growth capital formation occurs to finance the upgrading of the system. Meaning the more energy we consume, the faster it will fix itself. it's
like
counterintuitive.
forcing us to
Yeah.
innovate.
So it's actually, I think that, you know, what's happening with Bitcoin is going to help deliver a cleaner energy grid faster than it would have happened otherwise.
I agree.
It's counterintuitive, but that's kind of how things tend to work. Which is a different argument as to, you know, the role of Bitcoin. I mean, I have a view on the role of Bitcoin. It's, you know, it's somewhat limited in terms of the role that it plays. It has emerged, you know, as kind of digital gold. It's really more of a commodity than anything else. And what it's doing is it's not just Bitcoin, but all of the things that we're doing here is it's helping bring accountability back to a world that is severely lacking it, right? It's bringing transparency to systems that really need it.
Yes.
And we're democratizing access to utility, to the tools that you need for a potential life of prosperity, and democratizing investment opportunities so that things are available for everyone. We're leveling the playing field, and it's not limited to Bitcoin, but that is what Bitcoin has done for the world thus far. And obviously it's also put resources into the hands of a lot of people. I mean, one of the things that I'm so happy about by what's happened here and where the VCs are the problem, venture capital industry is like $250 billion, a little more. They're in the business of financing innovation and disruption. And for the most part, they generally miss this entire sector. Had they been paying attention and actually figured this out earlier, they would have been the biggest beneficiaries. And their beneficiaries are the financial elite, the financial institutions, the pensions, the endowments. Instead, $3 trillion has ended up in the hands of the people,
Yeah.
which is a really good thing. I'm glad they didn't get it. I'm glad that they poo-pooed this idea for years and years and years. Trust me, I was pitching them. They couldn't see it.
No, and besides the money, you know, it's I think we're also trying to empower the individual in terms of owning your own data, right? Not having it, having control over what happens with it, monetizing your attention, because so far we've given all our attention and for free to, you know, Facebook and Twitter and the likes, right? So being able to directly monetize for, okay, I'm gonna watch your ad, but you're gonna pay me directly, versus having Google as an intermediary, or you know, which is like the basis of Web 2. But I think that also brings a lot of power to an individual, right? Like play to earn, or those models.
Oh yeah, I mean, what we're doing here is going to be very disruptive, and
I think
ultimately create, I think, a world that's much more fair. You know, again, value creation and value capture are two very different things. You know, you take a look at things like prior to Web3 and the stuff that we're doing, you know, your protocols that power the internet, you know, how much money was made off of the creators of the protocols behind email and the browser and everything else. They created tremendous value for the world, but they captured very little. You know, and not to put down Kim Kardashian, but there would be the, you know, the how much value did you ultimately create and how much did you capture? You know, I mean, everybody is free to choose with their how they spend their discretionary time, but you know, there's a big difference between that, and you know, the financial engineers have done a very good job of capturing far, far, far more value than they ultimately create. And you know, look at what we're seeing with NFTs and everything, this creator economy that's emerging, and the idea that, you know, we're seeing abundance end up in the hands of those that historically lacked it. You know, it's exciting times.
What question I want to ask is, how can EOS buck the trend of centralization of capitalism? So how can EOS actually get into the hands of the people? Because all too often we see in crypto or encapsulation, or in capitalism generally, the over-centralization of capital as an asset. We see it in Bitcoin today. I think 90% of the Bitcoin is in the hands of very, very few. We're not seeing the 3 trillion going into the hands of the people. So how can we actually get the value of the crypto blockchain into the hands of the actual people and not just
The
us
masses.
as developers? Yeah, exactly.
And it's a good question. That's why we need to continue to innovate. And one of the reasons why having inflation in the system is also probably important. Deflation creates greater concentration of wealth when you think about it. And how do we do that? It's a good question. How do we get this into the hands of 1 billion people? I mean, what WorldCoin is doing is interesting. They've created these biometric readers, and they're giving out tokens to everyone in the world based upon your identity. So a little bit to everyone is the idea that they're trying to implement. That project's very early, and so TBD. But that's Sam Altman of Y Combinator. It's an interesting project. I don't like the name. I got tired of, in 2014, I got sick and tired of people putting the word coin, in their name. For a 2021 project, that feels like, But anyway, it might be the right marketing strategy. I don't know if they did their research. If you're trying to appeal to the masses.
Where there's eCoin and Mr. Robot, right?
Yeah.
That worked for this evil corporation.
Yeah, so it's a good question that I don't have the answer to. How do we end up doing that? And, we're going to continue to innovate around how people can get involved and what token distributions look like, and we're certainly not done yet.
What about things like universal basic income within the ecosystem?
Yeah, that's an idea that I don't like the term, but I like the idea. I'm a big supporter of the idea of giving people a hand up over a hand out, and so I like for people to receive these sorts of things that there's some participation required. It doesn't necessarily need to be significant. It's something so that you feel like you earned it. I was using the term universal basic sustenance for a little while, freedom dividend. There's a bunch of potential names for it. And the question is, where does that ultimately come from? I mean, we're seeing that experiment here in the United States right now with all these stimulus checks. I mean, most people didn't really put it together like that, but that's effectively UBI. We've just done a mass experiment because we also eliminated people's ability to work. It wasn't a clean trial of that system, because what it's done is it's created some problems a lot of problems in dependence in labor markets and otherwise, because it wasn't really used as a tool to empower people. It was the way those things came together at the same time was not the ideal way to run this test to get the data set, because the arguments have always been if you just give out money, then people are not going to work. The problem is we did that at a time we told them they can't work, and so it's bad data. We didn't get a proper data set to really test this hypothesis. I personally believe that we're going to have to go into that experiment. I mean, technology is disrupting the landscape of work, and old jobs are going to go away. New jobs will emerge.
Most jobs are going to get automated anyway.
Yeah, but new things will emerge, whether you're making art, whether you're supporting communities. We'll always find meaning in our lives. We're always going to be seeking purpose, and we're going to keep finding things to make our lives meaningful. and things we can't even imagine yet. Our imagination is really the only limitation. And so, we're going to see. We're in for an interesting ride, not just in this project, but in And never has civilization been confronted by such a challenging situation.
But surely then, if EOS could lead in that field, wouldn't that just put to bed any bad press that we're suffering?
Yeah, well, I've got some very big ideas, and I mean, I think that you guys, some of you are aware that I'm meeting with world leaders on a pretty regular basis. I'm very actively engaged with governments around the world, and I'm having some pretty major conversations about things that we could do with this technology. I'm not promising anything right now in that regard, mostly because you can't. If you want to get major things done with these types of groups, there is a political component to it. In terms of how things get done. But I'd say there's a lot of interest from government around the world to engage with innovation. The world is like, yes, we're ready to be part of the 21st century. They're saying yes to the future. Not all at once, but that trend is happening. And it's going to continue to happen. And so, just this weekend, I think I've got 25 ambassadors coming to Puerto Rico. I don't think Puerto Rico's ever had more than one ambassador ever come here at a time. I'm dealing with 35 heads of nations. And those conversations are about our future. And there's nobody else having these conversations.
But can we trust the government and the world leaders to deliver on those promises?
Depends on who they are.
So the 35 you're talking to.
I mean, the answer is we're seeing new leaders, emerging. What Mayor Suarez is doing in Miami, I think he's amazing.
Bukele in El Salvador.
What Bukele has done in El Salvador, and I know which other ones are about to do things, but our leadership is ultimately who we put there. Back to governance and participation again. And as we start paying more attention and start holding people more accountable, we're going to end up with better and better leadership. And our generation, for what looks like pretty much all of us in the room, we're the generation coming into power. And whom of us is going to stand up and step into these roles? That's those of us that choose to get involved and and make that commitment or that sacrifice depending upon how you view it. But there's new leadership coming in. People that understand what's going on in the present and have some sense of where we're going. That's probably not true of most of the leadership in the world today, but that's changing. As this current leadership we see in the world in a lot of cases they've overstayed their welcome. They've been there too long. We don't need to get into a debate about term limits, but we have a lot of people in leadership that still don't even use email. How are you able to make sensible decisions regarding our future if you don't understand what's going on in the world?
I was telling Lisa yesterday that blockchain solves for a lot of things, but it does not solve for human nature. So regarding your question, Michael, I think it's a bit of human's nature trying to get more and acquire more coins, and it's part of the whales trying to become bigger whales, and it might be that kind of a systemic flaw in depots where a block producer can get entrenched into a top position, increase their position by getting more rewards every day, restaking those rewards, increasing their voting power, and kind of increasing their relative stake exponentially, right? So I think that is kind of a built into the system, right? It's kind of it's a tough thing to solve for.
Yeah, but it's we solve these things again day by day. We get up and we keep learning. And we keep building. I have a lot of hope, and I believe in us. And those of us that are on the forefront of innovation are, going to be building a lot of these things and not just in our particular field, but we have new tools available to us. You know, we can do extraordinary things right now and quickly. Again, our imagination is the only real limitation.
Into that. Well, thanks, Brock. This has been awesome. I think this has been enlightening for all of us, right? So,
Well, we're not